Uh, Good afternoon, friends. Welcome once again to the webinar. This time we have a young panel, as opposed to the one that we've been having. Please don't get carried away by the gray hair. It's still a young panel. These are unusual times. Well, that's extremely unusual. And it doesn't look like the current situation is going away in a hurry. So we have to deal with it. We have to see how to handle it. I have always been positive about any adversity. You always looked for an opportunity in adversity. And I'm sure this panel that we have here, two eminent developers, two fantastic architects, would give us great ideas of what opportunity we can make over here. The last webinar we had Hafiz being very passionate about vertical buildings. So that is a thought that I would leave to the panel, and I would ask the first question to Amit. What do you see is the future? Where do you see this going? In which direction is it going? What changes do you immediately see that you would have to start with in the development that you are doing?
Thanks for having us, Vivek Bhai, on this panel. It's quite encouraging to see a young group of people, and hopefully a large audience that is watching this webinar. But my view is that this is the new reality, correct? So in my mind space, I've assessed and assembled in my mind that this is the new real, and there are many takeaways. So obviously, I'll just quickly talk about what it does for me in my developments, but simple things and small things like working out of home on Microsoft Teams, online meetings, etc., I think has become the new reality. This disruption by virtue of the coronavirus has obviously got us to sit back and rethink on a lot of things. So how I would re-establish or relook at what we would do in our developments is recalibrate the methodology of construction, which would entail understanding who the new customer is. So talking about the customer, let me just take a step back. I don't believe that the customer has run away. I think for the next 2 quarters, you will see a bit of a challenge, because ultimately coming back to the basics, which is roti, kapda and makan. So I think the makan is an important ingredient in everyone's livelihood. And this disruption in the corona has just got people to realize how important it is to have a home. So my belief, and I strongly believe that people would be more determined to own their own home, obviously in different configurations, in different locations, in different shapes and forms. So the takeaway, if I had to just give one quick takeaway, is we need to adapt ourselves to understand who the new customer is and understand what the customer really wants. We have a very large millennial and a younger population. So we need to kind of gear ourselves up to cater to this younger audience. And as far as physical construction is concerned, my view is that I think the times have gone where you have to build and keep building for 2 years, 3 years, and 4 years endlessly. I think one would have to induce and infuse new technologies to build faster, to deliver faster, because the customer, in my assessment, is a very fickle customer. So you need to actually be able to cater to that need almost instantaneously. So I think there would be a significant amount of development work one would need to do to be able to cater to that new breed of customers, both in terms of timelines and in terms of the actual need.
Great. Sandeep, what do you envisage would be the changes that you would bring on the design front to take care of the new consumer needs?
Well, as Amit rightly said, there would not be any major impact as you see it in long term, but in the near term, yes, there will be some kind of an impact. As an architect, what I always feel, when we design a private home for a particular family, we have that family in front of us. We know the family people, we know their needs, we know their budget, their likings, dislikings. But it's a very tough when it's a builder's kind of a planning, because we and builder together are doing a planning without having our actual customer live in front of us. So what are we doing? We are actually trying to envisage a lifestyle, and those are based on several market trends, the economical feasibilities, etc. So it is very important now to make this program very inclusive. So what I mean, that we should have a design charades with the people. So if you are launching a particular project in a particular part of Mumbai city or a particular segment of a family, we should have kind of a interaction with them, whereby we can make out plans, interaction in the sense a few sample cases, maybe 30, 40 people where the housewives are involved, the main person who takes the decisions are involved, the children are involved. Because today the design program is driven by cost. Sometimes we say, okay, in this particular area, the ticket size is 2 crore and we want to have a 20,000 rupees a square foot. So design 1,000 square foot of a house. Then it gets into a 900 square foot of a RERA area. But we need to find the human connection, the social connection into this, what exactly the people want. It's a huge risk that we put the product in market, and then if we find that this particular product is popular or not popular. So I feel now today, we have been talking about the balcony, which is very important to have the inclusion of balcony because people like the biophilic characteristics. But over a period of time, for some valid reasons, these particular design programs have been kind of getting diluted. So more inclusive program, like it gets done in many of the other parts of the countries. With the developers, we are trying to advocate, let's have a design charrette where we involve some 30, 40 sample cases, some opinion makers. So we can test our design program much before it goes live. We just found out that in a low cost housing, people are very happy to give them a ready to stay home. We have been pampering the luxury sector. But if you're giving a low cost or affordable housing with entire furniture, which adds another 15, 20 lakh rupees, but they get to put that into their agreement value and they get the EMI, which gets spread over 20, 25 years or 15 years. So it becomes much better for them to afford it. So these kind of, I feel the collaborative connections with the buyer that needs to be enhanced. Today, we are just based on a data which is following the trend. To set the trend, we need to have a more dialogue with the people, is what I feel. But real estate, as I fully agree, we are in a city of Mumbai, and which is a financial capital of India. There is no dearth. It will again pick up. It will definitely revive. It will revive in all sectors for that matter. This work from home culture will get enhanced, but yet the real estate is real estate, which will be required. Always it will be required.
Thank you. Dhaval, your family has built over 25 million square feet. Your company has built over 25 million square feet of projects all over the country. And what Sandeep says, making a lot of sense. How do you think that you would be able to have a consumer connect while designing? Because now we find that buyers are coming in later, not at an early stage. There was a time when buyers were coming in at a very early stage. Now you would have to have the designs ready. So how do you think that you'd be able to bring in a consumer connect while designing the fantastic projects that you make?
So thank you, Vivekji. See, basically what I feel is that today customers have gotten used to, the things were that you probably first, as Sandeepji said, that we first make the designs and then people are actually living in it and then they are getting used to it, and then they find probably a flaw in a particular design or a project, or seeing that, okay, my living room size is not big or not correct, or my bedroom size are not correct. So, now what has happened is today, with the kind of customers what we have, with the kind of database what we have, we actually, even before starting a project, probably do a kind of a survey. We can do a survey where we, probably find out what is the actual need of the hour, probably of that micro market. There has been some research agencies who've been doing it, or you have your private, team moving around and looking around what is the requirement of the people in a particular micro market, whether they would want a bigger size living room, whether they would want a bigger size bedroom or a kitchen, or their practical need is a balcony, or what is it, whether they are comfortable with just a 2-bedroom, or obviously that depends on the budget. but minor things like whether there is an L-shaped living room required where the kitchen and the dining and the living is together, or they need a rectangular shape. So all those things are very, very important for a decision of the buyer. So I think if we now is the time when and when this new COVID, with the COVID thing which is happening, people are more at home and understanding their needs and requirements. So whenever, if anyone is doing a new project, I think it's best that we do kind of a little survey of that particular micro market and then move forward.
Thank you. I just want to mention that we have a lot of bureaucrats who are on the chat, who are listening to all of you. So this gives a great opportunity to convey our point of view, so that if there are any things that we need from the government, that help can come through. Question for Rajiv. Use of technology. How would we integrate technology between the design and the development? What would you say that you would be your ideas going forward?
So I think with regards to what Amit spoke about speed of construction, what Dhaval said about, like trying to research data, and what Sandeep spoke about also, that you kind of have a meeting with, let's say, a common pool or a sample pool of possible residents. I feel there's a lot of effort needed by architects to be put in additionally, and so if we need to look at not just, everyone is talking about the end user being your client, but I think as an architect, for Sandeep or for me, the client is actually, there are lots of people as the client. There's the developer who's our client. There's the finance company which is funding the developer. There is the end buyer. There's the staff of the buyer. There's the other architects and interior designers who will come in and do renovations in these apartments or office complexes. There's your Uber driver. There's your Swiggy delivery. There's the security in charge. There's the landscape. These are all our clients. These are all people who eventually are going to interface with the space that we create. And if somehow magically, or after a truckload of effort, if we can get inputs, and towards that end, I think technology is the best asset that we have, like big data. I think we, at this point, don't use big data to our advantage. I think if we can just, talk to Jio, Facebook combination and request them, that, look, we're doing this, find out, like, Dhaval was talking about the L-shaped versus the linear. A lot of clients or buyers look at it from a very certain perspective, and they're not even able to articulate their brief correctly. Even when we're working on large homes, a lot of the clients, their children, we sit with them as a group, and then we sit with them independently, because what people give you as a feedback independently is very different from what people say in a group. So towards or use technology to understand the real pulse of the buyer, and similarly all the other sort of subcategories of people who will actually make this project entirely a success. Because for each company or a developer, the success of one project will feed the next one, and the feedback, like he said, they may buy this apartment, but they will eventually come back and say, oh, but we got conned in this one, the living room was too small, or the bathroom is too big, or the tiles are too small or big, or railing is lower, whatever ifs and buts that they may come up with. And then it's also up to us then, as sort of an architect, is to interpret that brief, because one part is the physical sort of list of the brief, but the other part is to interpret or read between the lines and understand that when they say, I want a thing, are they really talking about a thing, or they want, what is the end goal of the lifestyle they wish to aspire to or achieve? So I think technology is a great asset and should be utilized towards that. And even for speed of construction, I feel concrete is, I personally think, should be at the tail end of its life cycle, maybe another 20 years, but if we can go green by saving materials. So there's this particular sort of studio I attended at the A, which was about a thin sheet of metal being extruded using just the right cutting pattern to take load like a truss. or even 3D printing in concrete, which is not yet prevalent. It's there for small scale, very small scale houses or homes, never for sort of vertical construction. But that eliminates the need for shuttering. It allows you to pre-plan things. You know, I mean, I know people have been doing Maivan construction or like that sort of aluminium composite shuttering for a while, but I feel these are ways where technology can be an asset to speed up construction and to, like Sandeep said, you know, custom create. So the technology will allow you to really make a very detailed menu of items. That's my sort of 2 bits on it.
Vivek, can I just add something here quickly?
I'd like to add after that also, yeah, Vivek bhai?
Yeah, just quickly, Rajiv has captured it very well. And what he said is very important. The stakeholders for an architect and a developer is a large sector of everyone who's involved in project, which involves the general contractor, post-completion of contract, the facility manager. So now with the technology, it has already started catching up everywhere where you do construction drawings in Revit. Okay, so Revit actually allows us to understand all the clash detection before we go live onto the site. So the Revit is a fantastic tool where you actually can capture every component of the building, and based on which, when you go from 3D to 4D, it's called cost to a Revit with the BIM compatibility. So you have every component, you have a correct cost, so developer knows how much he is spending for which discipline, how much. He can also put his cash flow. He knows what would be the total money required in March 2021, what would be required in October 2021, and so on. And the 5D actually gives a schedule. So now there's a virtual tool. So you are de-risking yourself. You know the product, it is completely clash detected. 4D gives you the correct cost, which can be amended in between if the owner wants to. 5D gives you a schedule. And once the general contractor completes the project, when he puts the as-built drawing into that model, and it becomes 6D. So the 6D is a tool which has a 3D, 4D, 5D, and a 6D. And then it goes into the hands of facility manager as a 7D. So it's a progressive incremental process where you have a completely watertight thing which is in the hands of everybody in terms of a digital. So anything goes wrong in a large complexes, people don't do try and error method. They just go on to a 7th dimension of the entire as-built drawing. They fix the problem efficiently with a lot of cost effectiveness. I think we are slowly reaching there. And these are the kind of practices that can be adopted by the developers, architects, which will make life much simpler for the contractors to execute the project, and also much simpler for the facility managers, you know, because we build and we go away. The facility managers has a task to maintain, operate, and in the way it has been built. So I think the technology is really, really helping us to go in this kind of an era.
Thank you. You'll have to unmute. Amit, you need to unmute.
So Vivek bhai, what Sandeep just mentioned on 6D and 7D as far as Revit. So this is a message to all my team members and my architects in SD Corporation. I want exactly what you just heard. Okay. So anyways, on a more serious note, I actually had an engagement with an architect who's working on a project of ours yesterday. And the mandate to him is to work on Revit. So after Corona opens up, we are working on Revit on that project. And I'll tell you how Revit has looked at it, how I've looked at Revit. Because we would potentially integrate Revit into SAP because we already run on SAP. So that gives you effective control on cost, because today the word is all about cost, and cost. And how can you manage your costs well in a development? And I think that's an important consideration for people, developers, architects, and the entire fraternity, because ultimately what is our objective is we want to give the best possible value to the end customer. The only way we can do that is if we can have an effective control on cost. And cost can only start at the design stage. Cost can start at the approving authority stage, because the approving authorities need to reduce their premiums, because there's no way that developers will be able to survive. And at the end of the day, potentially pass on that benefit to the end customer. Now, that was on point one on technology. On the second is something that I just heard in the conversation in terms of decision-making on buying a house. So over and over again, I've seen this, and I'd like to share it. I think all the female viewers would be happy with this, because I believe that the only decision maker to buy a house is the lady of the house, right? So what do I need to focus on? I need to focus on the kitchen. I need to focus on the children. And that's the only thing. However, you may have multiple coronas, you may have multiple disruptions. Ultimately, it's the lady of the house who's going to take that call. So we need to be mindful of how we can, and that's on a lighter note, but realistically, what is it that we can do as a developer to factor in the requirements of the key members of the household who are going to use it, right? And on the third point I wanted to make is that, unfortunately, including me, developers have have lost a sense of soul. Because and if you kind of go back to maybe 50 years or 70 years, and you look at old Bombay. What was old Bombay? Old Bombay was living in chawls, and chawls had a small passage outside the house. And what was that passage allowing us to do? The passage outside the house was actually allowing us to have that community engagement. So as the chawls diminished and as Bombay moved northwards, developers built these monstrosities and forgot to add that essential soft ingredient, which I believe, when I said earlier, is that developers have lost the soul, is the fact that how are we catering to maximization of the communal and society engagement? I think that social engagement is equally important. Let's not get afraid of social distancing, because social distancing is a short-term phenomena. At the end of the day, you need to make sure that you build communities, build homes that can engage with people, that have homes that can engage with people, and communities that can engage with people. So that's my take on those three things that what I heard earlier.
So, sorry, can I jump in, or Dhaval, you want to say something?
I think no, I'm good.
Okay, no. So I think it's a great point you brought up, because if you so budget is, as much as we as architects like to kind of say like, oh, if only you give us a limitless budget, we'd make the most fantastic project in the world. But I think it's a key determinant and a key aspect of control. So between the project management company, the developer, the various vendors, so there's actually an interesting, there's an architectural firm, Big Architects. I mean, I'm sure all of us know him, but they've done some fantastic work when you talk about communities, where you kind of have a space where you create. I mean, he's done one project. If you look at Netflix has a series called Abstract, and a couple of the projects which have been documented there are brilliant examples of a design firm that has sat and sort of value engineered. There's enough slack. I can be critical of any design. As an architect, I think after studying from school, you're taught how to be able to critique a project. So I'm sure there'll be enough architects on this platform who might dislike certain aspects of that design. But I think what is accomplished, or what is a positive takeaway from that, is it fits a particular budget model. It fits a particular clientele. It brings public space. And like what Amit spoke about, it creates this sort of common community space, which is shared by everyone. It's a common resource. It's for free in terms of the developer has to pay for the construction, but it's not within FSI and things like that. So there is a certain level of innovation, or a completely sort of turning your traditional approach towards design upside down and creating something like that. I think that's what we should all strive towards, and be more. I mean, that'll effectively mean that people will have access to kind of spaces which are more desirable, and therefore they'll have a demand.
Dhaval, what is your take on this?
So I personally feel, yes, technology is going to definitely play a very, very big role. And as a step towards this, as Revit and all these, softwares which are coming up, which definitely saves a lot of time and cost. But I definitely see, because recently, about just few days back, I was in one of the other talk, and there were like at least loads of solutions which are coming up in startups, which are actually saving a lot of solutions and giving a lot of solutions for real estate. So just to give you a few examples, there was something which were using Revit and other softwares of 2-3 different types. Obviously, I'm not too much into technology, but different softwares where you can program all these together and see how it can be. So maybe structural, maybe MEP, maybe a design, architect, all the drawings coming in together, and then seeing how services can be managed. Plus there was another one which found very interesting, and as a cost and time effective, was modular homes. So where we see that this, I feel, is going to be the next future, where we've seen in the technology recently, there has been modular kitchens, there has been modular bathrooms which have already come in, but now what I have seen also is modular homes which will come in Bradford Towers, and it can be customized to whatever our needs and levels want. So I think those are the technology which will play a lot of different roles and important roles in construction coming forward. And the biggest decision for all of them is going to be cost. So if these technology come up, or are they mitigating with the actual current cost or even going lower, then definitely it will be a success. And looking at whatever solutions which I have seen the other day, I feel they are all cost mitigating, and people will definitely use these kind of things. So, but technology will play a lot of important role. But at the same time, with technology, you can create what is required. But the most important thing I feel is that what is the actual need. So maybe the need is very important, because for as we were discussing, the panelists just said that for us in India, home is a very, very important thing. And with the way this now COVID situation has happened, the things which have moved, we have seen, and I was talking to a few developers which were saying that people, or the millennials, were always considering not buying a house over the last 3-4 years and saying that I can live in the best apartments paying rent. But when this COVID situation happened, the landlords themselves did not allow the tenants to come back, because they were working somewhere, and they all work in IT companies and the software companies, they were abroad. The landlords did not allow them to come back to their own houses where they were living as tenants, because the landlords didn't want to take a chance. And that's when they realized that eventually home is where, if I have my own home, that's where I can be more safe and I can stay securely. And this has come out as a very, very big realization. So I think that is going to move forward. And at the same time, with this, everyone's need and everyone's requirement is going to come. So there should be a lot of emotional as well as technological connect for real estate going forward, is what my feeling is.
Taking forward from this, question for Sandeep, as on the DCR, we have a great new DCR, but do you have any suggestions how it can improve to serve?
I have a major suggestion, yeah?
Sorry?
I have a major suggestion on the DCR.
Next is
Okay, I think actually that's a very subjective question, and I'm sure all the panelists will have a lot of suggestions. I'll just take 1 minute on a technology of a construction of building. See, we all know that we have to move from the era of constructing the building to a manufacturing the building, but we have to understand Mumbai comes in zone 3. There is only a challenge when we go super top. Otherwise, even today, we have all the kind of infrastructure and possibilities available for us to make 100%. Besides the foundation is done cast in situ, to do a building which is off-site prefabricated. It's perfectly possible. Even otherwise, the conventional construction that we are following has only 42% of the component which is core and shell. Remaining 58% of the component, which includes envelope, MEP, etc., can be done off-site prefabricated. And I think many of the developers have already started adopting that era. So it's a good time now where the technology is with us, the technocrats are with us, and cost will always come under control once we have a critical volume with us. So I personally foresee in 2 to 3 years, we will be much, much ahead in terms of our construction technology with respect to our globe. Coming back to the DCR question, this is something which I have been trying to advocate on various platforms whenever I get an opportunity. Our parking rule, currently the Mumbai city's parking rule says that you have to have 2 cars per 1,000 square feet of a house. So I feel this rule needs to be revisited, because 1 million square foot of a habitable homes you will build, another 0.8 million square foot of a parking you are building. And especially in these COVID conditions, do we really need this humongous parking lots? Whenever we talk with our international friends, they said, okay, Shard building in London, 600,000 square foot of a leasable space, 42 car parking. Foster Partners Jerkin building, 4.5 lakh square foot of a leasable area, 12 car parking. Please Google it and see it yourself. People will say, okay, London has a fantastic transportation system, but aren't we going to our city also to have a master transportation plan? So eventually after 5 years, we will also have a good transportation system. Then what would we do with so many parking lots that we have already built? I mean, any building we start, we begin with 2,000 car parking, 3,000 car parking. I think it's really something that we need to look into it, especially now RERA has come. So when the RERA has come, the developer is giving a disclosure to all the purchaser, and the developer should be given a choice to take the parking as much as he wants. It should not be mandatory on him. Yes, there has to be recommendatory suggestion, but there could be a people, actually who are doing business in Karnak Bandar, Bendi Bazar for their 3 generations. They have been going by train. But if you have to make a new commercial building there, you have to compulsorily, it is non-negotiable. The current DCR says it is non-negotiable. You have to provide that much car parking in that particular location. Without studying, it's a flat rule. I think it should not be flat. It should be dynamic. The choice to the builder and the choice to the end occupant should be given because RERA gives a disclosure. And in that way, we can control the parking. We are creating so much of a concrete and other kind of a build structure. They are very expensive to maintain. And all these parkings, look at it, commercial parking, after the office hours, for 12 hours, they're just lying idle. They are only useful for only 8 to 10 hours. So why can't we do a community parking for a place like Bandra Kurla Complex, the South Mumbai? That's how it is practiced everywhere. Toronto, New York, Barcelona, whichever city you go, there is no this kind of a maddening parking requirements. I think it's a high time now. I have spoken to some of the decision makers in NAREDCO, MCHI, and ASSOCHAM. I am in a process of preparing a single page white paper on this, and I feel if everybody agrees with this, we should take this up ahead with our policymakers. And I'm not saying take it away; it has to be there. It has to be recommendatory. It cannot be mandatory. And it's a very subjective issue. I'm just giving a thought for this particular product.
Sandeep, we can separately talk offline on this because the DC regulation needs to be dynamic. But talking of the DC regulation, Vivek, I'm not too sure how many people from the bureaucracy or political system would be on this webinar. But I must congratulate the Maharashtra government for the manner in which they are handling the current crisis. I don't believe they could have done anything better, given the kind of population that a city like Bombay has. I believe Mr. Thackeray has, performed extremely well and beyond anyone's expectations. The bureaucracy, which is the actual engine, and all the staff of the municipal corporations and all the other government bodies are working tirelessly for us in this coronavirus and the corona pandemic. So kudos and hats off to all. I must congratulate and wish them all well and wish them the best of health. But having said that, I think it's important for the bureaucrats who are listening to this that in order for the industry to survive, there is no other option but to have a relook at anything and everything in the DC regulation. So when I say anything and everything, I mean very specifically, A is the premiums and the manner in which premiums are charged. So about 30 to 40% Vivek Bhai of the premium. So let's say if somebody is selling a project in Kandivali at 10,000 rupees a foot, BMC and the government takes about 4,000 to 4,500 rupees a square foot of that premium, 3,500 to 4,000 rupees of that as a premium cost. Now, if we have to survive as developers post this corona, I think it's an important consideration for the government to do 2 things. A, potentially defer this payment, or potentially reduce this payment. If we don't do this, we will not be in a position to give value to the end customer, because both the government and the developers need to understand, and the architects and the entire fraternity need to understand that ultimately we are working for the customer, and we've forgotten that we're working for the customer. We need to give value to the customer. How can a developer give value to the customer if the premium cost is so high? Cost of construction is not going down. So we need to, in order for us to sustain and in order for us to give value and leave value for the on the table for our customer, the decision makers need to have a careful relook at the cost of premiums in the city of Bombay. The second part of the DC regulation, and not only the DC regulation, but anything to do with the government, as far as the construction industry is concerned, is I think there needs to be, as Sandeep mentioned, a dynamic approach to handling the multiple changes that are happening both in the world around us, in the construction technologies around us, and therefore making sure that we kind of adapt ourselves equally fast. Because if you see the DC regulation, if you read the title on the DC regulation, it says DCPR 2034. In other words, it means that the next time we're going to relook at this holistically is in 2034. So my only 2 bits on this is that we need to have a dynamic methodology of adapting ourselves to change. As a decision maker or as a policy maker in the government?
We have a lot of questions. Before we get to the questions, Rajiv, anything more you'd like to add, taking the whole discussion?
No, I honestly think, again, it sounds like I'm harping the same point, but basically, even if you could use big data, the government, so if let's say, the Chief Minister of Maharashtra can have access to big data and based on that determine what the bylaws should be, and which is what leads to a dynamic bylaw because there's constantly changing data. So if it allows you to adapt faster, change faster to what is the demand, and you kind of can change your rules to fit the demand. So there'd always be that sort of feedback loop mechanism. And that's what technology and big data allows. In the earlier days, it made sense because you didn't have easy access to data, which could be collated, tabulated and, be read to give you information. For a rule which is made to last for 40 years, 20 years, 30 years, I think rules now need to change based on changing environments, changing financial constraints, changing demands from a client. Today, what 10 years ago, the buyer who came in, like Amit spoke about, he was talking about women in kitchen, but you'll have a bunch of women throwing, beating you up for or generalizing that they're all supposed to be in the kitchen. But no, but that aside, I think broadly it changes. Like you said, decision makers used to be, let's say, the head of the family back in the day, and then it became the son, then it became the daughter-in-law, and maybe now it's the kids who decide which color of car to buy. So, everyone needs to adapt rapidly based on how things change. So I think to commit to something and say that, okay, I'm going to follow this rule for the next 30 years or 20 years is just very, actually it's short-sighted, So it's nice to have something which is dynamic and allows you to adapt, but use data so that you're able to adapt to what you need. That's my sort of bit.
No, that's great. In fact,
okay, but I'd just like to add one more point. I'm sorry. We talked about, Rajiv rightly mentioned data science, correct? And using data for multiple aspects. I just wanted you and the people on this webinar to know the chief data scientist for the Obama administration in the United States until Mr. Obama was the president was an Indian, right? Why can Indian be there helping the government of the United States in the data science? And he was the chief. He's a young guy. He's probably my age. He's married to a friend of mine. And they are using the skill sets of an Indian, origin, Indian educated individual as the chief data scientist. Why can't we bring these people into our government?
Bring him back.
Yeah.
Yeah, just to add a little bit, I fully endorse what Rajiv is saying. You can have engineering guidelines which can be static, like how much open space should be there, what is that exactly, because those can be derived out of a very tangible science. But rest of the thing has to be dynamic. There is something called contextual DC rules, which is there in New York, Tokyo, in Hong Kong, where they have a sector-wise flexibility for the zonal requirements, and those are very dynamic. Those are not one flat static thing. So they engage, as Amit said, the expert from the world who would actually study the demographics, come up with some out-of-box ideas for the urban planning. That's the way we can remain modern, So I fully endorse what Rajiv is saying. The technology should be utilized to understand the context, and context is not static. It will always remain dynamic, and in coming years, the dynamism speed is going to get accelerated. So we have to bring that inclusiveness in our DCR and allow the freedom to have sector-wise, cluster-wise, case-specific amendments to be done.
Great. Anika, questions for the panelists?
Okay, we have somebody known as Aditi Chaudhary who wants to enter the room and ask a question. Rahul, can we allow Aditi in, please?
Aditi, go ahead.
Okay, in the meantime, I'll read another question out. How can we control costs if we are opting for technology in construction? In the present scenario, developers are already struggling with prices per square foot.
So can I take that?
Yeah.
So the biggest challenge, let me tell you, I think the biggest challenge in cost overruns, we'll deal with the selling side or the selling price separately. Let's talk about the cost side. So one of the biggest reasons why there are cost overruns is there's an inadequacy in the quality of the drawing, or there's an inadequacy in the quality of the manner in which you are implementing a drawing basis something that has been given. So the infusion of technology, which in the form of a tool like Revit, will hopefully, as Sandeep mentioned, disallow or allow for conflict resolutions. So when I say conflict resolutions, the conflict that comes between architecture, structure, and MEP. So this is more of a technical issue. So if you can have your structure well coordinated with your architectural drawings, your facade drawings, and your MEP drawings, and all well integrated together, I think you can have a very, very focused, robust drawing which is delivered, and therefore a very, very accurate cost. Now on the sell side, there's a challenge, and there's going to be a continual challenge on pricing pressures from the market in terms of what's happening around us. So depending on the different degrees of pressure and financial constraints developers have, they will sell at their different prices. Therefore, there's a continual pressure from the sell side. But as I mentioned earlier, your cost is something that you can control. So the one key ingredient is construction cost. To support the construction cost is technology such as Revit. And the other key ingredient to support your cost is the premiums payable to the government. So if both can be handled and controlled well, I think we have a winning combination to provide value to the customer.
Pardon my ignorance, what is Revit? Because I'm not a tech.
So it's an AutoCAD software.
So Vivek, just to add, I am of the opinion that technology will not increase the cost, it will reduce the cost, because you are going to take the use of technology to optimize or eliminate the wastage. And imagine if the project can be completed 1 year before. The financial closure of a project coming 1 year before is a huge benefit for the developer. So there's a huge cost developer is paying for the money. The money is not, cheap in our country. So I feel technology, using it and making it expensive, it's absolutely no. You have to use the technology for the better quality, more sustainable approach to the city, more environmentally clean approach, plus it has to benefit you. It will never increase the cost if it is used smartly. Revit is a kind of a software which actually makes a virtual building on the computer. Every component of the building, your air conditioning duct, your low side, high side, your cable trays, your electrical, your switches, whatever goes in that building, those millions of components, each and every component is captured to a virtual drawing. So it is properly tested before it goes live, clash detected, and you have a cost of each and every component. So the owner can control by putting in alternatives, by putting in this. So it's a nice tool where you can play with it in terms of your cash flow, your overall cost efficiency. Tomorrow, after some time, if the owner says, I'm getting a good price, I'm allowing you another 100 rupees to increase. So you don't increase it on your gut feeling. You actually go to those components. You know immediately if you upgrade your switches, so much cost will increase. If you do this marble to Italian marble, the cost will increase so much. So it's a very smart tool for you to actually handle it while you are actually executing the project and managing the project.
But tell me, how far away are we from building being 3D built?
Very close, very, very close. I will not be surprised to see in next 6 months. A lot of people are working, my all fellow colleagues are capable enough. Another 1 year, you'll see that happening here.
No, you said 3D printed or 3D built?
No, not 3D printed will yet take. 3D printed small objects and small structures will come. But what I'm talking now about, this is already in existence. You know, I mean, the kind of execution, construction documentation strategy. 3D printed building will yet take some time. You know,
Sagrada Familia is 3D printing in concrete already, by the way.
Yeah, that's awesome, wonderful.
So I have a little different view because, you know, honestly, there are two approaches what I see. Firstly, when I mean the system what we follow, or, you know, primarily majority of the projects what we see in India is that the drawings of every of the project is coming as per the stage of the project. So probably they may be a little advanced. So it's either till the basement and then till the podiums, and then you go to certain floors. So there is no like a complete docket of drawing which the developer or anyone else is getting on day one. Obviously systems are coming in place and people are now adapting to it, because so that is one of the times which we feel that leads to a delay. And at the same time, what I feel, definitely construction technology and all of this is going to, as Mr. Sandeep rightly said, technology will probably reduce the cost because time is going to be saved a lot. But there is somewhere down the line we need to also see the market, and we also need to see the sales point of view, because tomorrow what happens is, if I build a building and if I'm done, my investment towards my project will go higher, but if I'm not able to sell at that pace what I'm building, eventually it is going to be it's like a catch-22 situation for it. So we need to balance it out very well to see that if I don't need to completely invest in the entire building and then put it up for sale, because while I do so, the pressure for selling at that point in time becomes that, in the market, oh, this building is ready and it's not selling. So there needs to be a little bit of balance in both. Yes, this is very, very different for commercial, where you need to make it ready and then only the tenants will come in. But I think even residential, with this RERA coming in and things like that, obviously all depends on the developer to developer, but there needs to be, my feeling is, a bit of a balance in it, because eventually it should not happen that when we go for technology we build it, but if there is no market to sell or the product, or if I make a 5 lakh square feet building and I can't sell it in 1 month, possible in 1 month, that if the market does not absorb that in a month or two, then I'm stuck for it and probably take another 2 or 2.5 years to sell it. So you need to see how we can balance this together.
Sorry, can I speak, Dhawal? Can I?
Yeah.
So now I think so again, like how technology will help facilitate this, right? Is that it will tell you upfront that the market is only going to absorb 100 apartments and not 200. So you build your you build your project in phases. 1, 2 is that never. I mean, at least for us as a practice, don't start construction till architecture, MEP, and structural drawings are complete to the letter of the law, because otherwise, like what Amit said, you will be in a situation where cost overruns are going on because your drawings are developing as you go along. So unless you have a whole sort of GFC set, like, locked and signed by all the consultants saying, guys, we're all in accepting, mistakes are there in everything, but let's say to the best of their abilities at that point, they're able to commit saying this is a perfect set of drawings where all our needs as a team of consultants are all sort of catered to. Because that will be the only way you'll save money and you will build what you need. And then, like you said, that if there is data which tells you that, it's only going to absorb 10 apartments, then you don't build at that point. Even if your drawing set is ready, like consultant fees are peanuts in terms of, the overall project cost. So in that sense, even if you have the entire docket of drawings ready, you can choose to construct at your discretion or at the market's need. That would be sort of my way to go about it.
And just to add to all the architect friends on this panel and on the webinar, I think developers are very impatient. They expect architects to throw out a drawing in a day, and that unfortunately never happens. So I think we as a developer,
say no.
So as developers, we have to be kind of, we have to be patient, and we need to understand that to get the precision and quality of drawings, and therefore the precision and quality and precision in the construction cost, we need to give time. We need to give architects and consultants time to give the actual qualitative end result.
No, Rajiv, I agree with what you're saying, but there are different practical challenges in Bombay. Like if I have to, if my project is let's say 5 lakh square feet, and then if I have to, and if there are like 2 towers or 1 single tower which I need to consume that 5 lakh square feet, and then if I have to go in phases, it's a very challenging thing for sales, that someone who's staying in an under construction building, or the mindset of the customer should also be there I'm ready to, with the construction going up, I'm ready to stay beyond and under it and all of that. So it's yes, you're right, but we need to we need just to look around in all different aspects too.
No, I agree completely. We have a project in Bangalore, which all I'm saying is like that docket of drawings is critical.
Yeah,
it's like your
true.
lifeline.
Correct.
So like in the Bangalore project, we've completed the drawings. Then it faltered for various sort of reasons, not in our control or the developer's control, honestly. So there is, like you said, one part is completely constructed and ready, and the other part. So I think what the developer's approach is that you make that part as clean, neat, habitable, and as less of an issue see, I mean, like you said, we're in Bombay. So even if the building next to you is under construction, in theory, you're living in a construction site. It may not be, it'll be at the end of your property and in someone else's property, and you have no control over it. So like one apartment renovation is going on and you've moved in. There'll always be, on a given time in a 200 flat building, there'll be at least 10 or 15 which are undergoing renovation just by law of averages, you know. So we're all always living in construction sites. It's just about how you pitch it. And yes, the end user has to have that mentality. But I just feel it'll be a more viable project for you as a developer if you approach it like that, you know.
Just to keep it in a nutshell, Dhaval, we can always prepare a drawing set which has a flexibility to do a mid-course correction. I fully understand where you are coming from, because whatever you envisage at the beginning of the project may not be the same situation. Fine, but that does not take away from the fact that we should prepare like Raju said, a completely crystallized, well-coordinated full set. You have the entire, I would say, the process in your hand. You can do it phase-wise, you can do it one time, and the same set can always go under revision. It can have a mid-course correction, and it can be adaptable with the kind of requirements that it will have in future.
No, that's what I mean. Usually in our systems we do that, but I mean I'm just talking generally as developers who you know who get those I mean designs and drawings. They prefer to take instead because their CCs are going to be linked to that, their FSIs are going to be linked to that. So that's how they do it. But it's that's what I'm saying in general. But it's a practice of every different company.
Amit, you built a fantastic Imperial Towers. What are two things you would have done differently? And that is what you would do differently going further.
Yeah, so I'll before I tell you about the Imperial, you know, I'll just share you know, quick 1 minute experience about building high rises, correct? So I don't know how many developers, but I think, I don't know if I would say I'm fortunate or unfortunate to have been a part of a company that has built, we've built more than 5 buildings, or actually we built 5 buildings that are greater than 200 meters tall. So I think I've got, all my hair has gotten white from that, from building those tall buildings, because to build in our city is a huge challenge, and it's a complex, it's complex, it's a challenge. There are issues of getting RMC trucks in and so on and so forth. But the two takeaways that were different when we built the Imperial was the first, the thought itself. So in 98 or 99 is when we envisioned this building. It was both actually Shapurji and my father who actually envisioned it, to give them the credit. So the thought of building, you know, a landmark was something that was kind of, the vision of building a landmark was, that was one key important ingredient, and have the conviction to build a 60 floor or 200 meter tall building, 250 meter tall building in 98 was, you know, is quite commendable. But the more softer aspects is that we have a fantastic community. So apart from your traditional buyers, which would be a business, individual running a business, we have a great sense of community of professionals from all walks of life, from different industry segments. And I think it's the community and the manner in which the community has conducted itself over the last 10 years that has helped Imperial stand out. The second was, at the time, I don't believe in the
your voice.
Apartments. So finished apartments would, as I would define it, is a warm shell, which would include marble flooring, a finished false ceiling, completed toilets. So the only thing one needed to do was actually bring in their fixed furniture and loose furniture. So this was the second, you know, significant difference, I think, of the takeaway that I've actually had of the Imperial. Obviously, there were, in the third bucket, I would compartmentalize and put multiple things in terms of more than technology, materials used that have actually helped the building stand out. So these are the 2 or 3 things that I think have been different for the Imperial.
Great.
Actually making those trips with you to Spain to buy all that marble for Imperial in 2003, 2004. So I can't forget that. So I think that was, I think, one of a kind. I don't know how many developers did it at the time.
Now he has an option where you can use a thinner piece of marble on an Indian marble. You can talk to him about that the next time.
Do that. He'll want me to buy 20 mm marble, not even 18. Okay.
Yeah, so for that I have big data available.
So I kind of agree with Amit that all buildings should be warm shell, because you cannot allow the wet works to happen in these kind of a high-rise structures. It will be a nightmare if you allow 200, 300 families to do a wet works. And people accept if you do a good kind of a wet warm shell, which has got adaptability of all kinds of home automation, good quality kitchen, nice bathrooms with a properly designed. That's the trend where people are very happy. And
that's what I
the way
think.
to
80-90%
I'm
of
talking about yeah, I agree. It's a debatable issue, but when you talk about a tall structure which are above 180 meters, that's a practice which even we are adapting, and we saw that people are accepting it. I mean, they are happy if you do a good job, and they will yet make their house beautiful by getting the nice branded furniture, doing the accent walls, doing a little bit here and there. But if you allow wet works in the tall structures, it's a nightmare. Imagine 300, 400 families engaging their own civil contractors. Entire sanctity of your lobby, your elevators will go for a toss. That's a practice which is internationally also well accepted. It's a subjective issue, but I kind of endorse his thoughts.
I'm saying that's 80% or 90% of the buildings of Mumbai are warm shell now. If you see, everyone's giving their kind of amenities, and it's only loose furniture which you bring in, and some fixed furniture.
Absolutely, that's the way to go.
Yeah.
Salil wants to.
So I may disagree with you guys, but fine. Sorry, Vivekji, go ahead. Huh?
No. Finish what you're saying, then we can take.
I feel actually, so like the Bangalore building that we did, it's been designed in a way that everyone has their own lift lobbies. If there is construction going on, there are no common walls. You enter directly into the basement. There's an area like a separate service lift. So I think you have to actually plan for the fact that no matter what, I mean, I may think I'm the best guy in the world to design this house, but everyone comes with their own little idiosyncrasy and separate requirement. So the way we've done the Bangalore layout is that it's a column-free space entirely. So it can be and we've given multiple layout options to, like, for a 4-bedroom space to be a 3-bedroom, a 2-bedroom, and a 1-bedroom. And the plumbing can basically, your bathrooms can be in 27 different locations. So I think if you build in flexibility into your design, then the resident who comes in has the ability to change things, adapt. Today, when I move in, I might be, just married. And then maybe 5 years down the line, I have kids and I want to make changes, or, my parents decide to come and live with me because of XYZ situation. So requirements of the buyer or of the inhabitant of that apartment, even from the time he buys it to the time he eventually maybe moves out or rents it out or, does something else with it, will keep changing. So I feel change is the constant that you need to design for, which is why no matter how nice a shell you provide, there is a very strong chance that sooner, if not later, there will be alterations and amendments and changes, So I feel it's better to plan that there will be changes, there will be intrusions into the space, whether it's a tall building or a short building, That's my sort of take on that.
Okay, we've got a question from Salil. Salil, will you enter the room?
Yeah.
He's in there. I can see him. Hi, Salil.
You can see me also. Oh, very good. Okay, hi.
Some younger photograph of yours, but
can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right. I have one question that says, that is that on the one hand, when we are saying, that, the apartments are made and then they don't sell and, stuff like that. How do you balance this whole dichotomy that there are thousands and thousands of flats lying unsold when, on one hand, and there is still a huge demand of people who want houses. So that it's not like everybody in Bombay has got a house, and there are thousands of people who want to buy houses, and at the same time there are thousands of flats that are not sold. So I think this whole idea that came up in the beginning of the thing about investing in very serious data, market surveys. Every Hollywood film, big budget film, actually does a complete market survey before they get an Arnold Schwarzenegger to underline it. So isn't it sad to see that this industry is sort of somehow lost its touch with what's really happening on the ground?
I think Salil, you're absolutely correct.
Yeah. Go ahead, Amit.
Yeah, so Salil, you're absolutely correct in the assessment. I think developers, if you see in the last boom, and the last significant boom was somewhere in 2007, 8, and 9, around that time, before the crisis, right? And I think at that time, people and multiple people entered the business and entered the real estate space. So what ended up happening is that they overbuilt without understanding. So they got, that was the kind of, the real estate cycle. And I think they got onto the real estate cycle at the wrong time. So that's my first assessment of your observation. The second is that just consciously, I think it's a cash flow issue, because a lot of times people would like to buy in an under construction project rather than buy in a ready-made project, obviously just because of that cash flow. So they don't have that need to own an apartment today, but they have a need to own it 3 years from today, and therefore would pay over a period of time rather than pay it all at one shot. So these are the two of my personal assessments on your observation.
I mean,
So
I have one. Sorry, I have one thing to add. I mean, when you say there are thousands of apartments which are unsold and lying ready, I kind of don't agree completely, because I feel, that, specifically if I say in Mumbai, when we are talking as a Mumbai market, I mean, I don't know. I mean, there are some data which are going around, but those are like based on like, okay, I have a land parcel which is of 10 acres, and then I might make 10 lakh square feet. But I have actually just started off with 1 lakh square feet. I have not started off with 10 lakh square feet, and they'll come and say that, okay, Ajmera has a 10 lakh square feet unsold stock. But that's not the case when I've actually just done as a phase 1 of 1 lakh square feet, and I'm probably constructed only 50% of it or whatever it is. So, but at the same time, when there is a project which is ready, especially in Mumbai, I don't see, at least from our experience or, majority of what I hear from my fellow developers, once their stock is ready, they have too much in the hand to sell, or probably they sell it. It's one of or two rare cases where you probably see few buildings which are lying empty. But in Mumbai, once it is ready, I don't see anyone having like an unsold stock. It's that the fundamental thing of the researchers which say that there are thousands of apartments, unsold or not being sold, is fundamentally on those grounds that as I told you, I have a 10-acre property, but only started with 1 acre or first phase, which is a 1 acre, 100 apartments. And he'll say, oh, I have 1,000 apartments which are unsold, but I have not even started construction, not even marketed it, done nothing. So how do you, define it as an unsold stock? So that's where the difference lies. But I really don't see once actually being ready, something being unsold.
True. So, Dhaval, you're right. It's a kind of a coexistence, as some of the developers have been extremely good in terms of having a good clients and selling it very fast. Some of the stocks are remaining unsold. So there's a kind of a mixed situation. I'm trying to take Salil's question in a different way. Very well said, Salil. The time has come. See, developer, in fact, we work with developers, and developer takes so much of a risk, I mean, they have land, they have to develop a design program. So what is important? Does the master plan of the city has to be prepared as a centralized plan by the best urban planners, and then that data is given to developer, and developer then exercises his expertise to do the best. Today, what has happened, Mumbai City has a very flat development plan. So in every sector, like for example, Mumbai City has 221 wards, and it only talks about zoning diagram. Where are the playgrounds, where are the public amenities, and where are the private lands, slum lands, etc. So every developer has their own wisdom, their strength. They develop a design program and they start with the building, which is perfectly fine. But if we develop a robust master plan of the whole Mumbai city as a polycentric city, whereby you create multiple nucleuses, whereby everybody will not have to commute more than 3 kilometers. Within 3 kilometers, they have their offices, they have their entertainment, they have their houses, everything. So every part of the Mumbai will have equitable distribution, and maybe whatever stock that is created is more relevant. And that's what is a practice observed in many of the, even New York City has a master plan prepared by the New York City Urban Plan Authority, which are guidelines. Of course, those are not very strict guidelines where developer doesn't have a freedom, but those are very strong basis for which they have developed a 25 years vision plan and what to do in next 5 years, what to do in 10 years. So there are higher chances of success when a developer exercises those guidelines. I think the time has come where we really need to have you engage through all of these associations. As I said, all the developers are here, the planners are here. There has to be a lot of design charrettes, and see Mumbai as one holistic large city and develop a master plan and then move ahead with every sector. There is a higher chances of success there.
Yeah, so I'll be the last one, Salil, sorry. But with regards to your question, I think if there are vacant apartments, if let's say what the statistics show as per what Dhaval has said, then in which case there are not that many vacant apartments. But if there is a situation where there are vacant apartments and people are still looking for homes, that means somehow we've not got the right fit. So it's like I walk into a store and there are lots of shirts, but none of them fit me. So I'm still going to be looking for clothes, but there will be a lot of unsold inventory of shirts. So I think that could be the cause for the mismatch. And I think you've typed out one more question, which talks about a comprehensive set of drawings and if the developers will wait for it, and how midway changes or panic changes, as you call them, will affect that. But I think it's about a mindset which is changing. Some developers may, some developers may not. Some architects may not be ready to give a full set of drawings. So it needs to be, both parties need to agree to a strategy. And they will agree to the strategy if they both are convinced that it's the right way to go about it. If not, then there will always be that sort of mismatch. And it's like every person needs to work with the right team. So if it's the right team, then they both have sort of aligned agenda.
We have a question from Aditi. I think that would probably be the last external question. Aditi, will you ask? Will you come into the room and ask?
Yes, surely. Thank you, Mr. Talwar, firstly, for hosting such a great conversation. My question was basically what Mr. Thakur touched upon about social and communal engagements. I'd like to ask what and how you think the design of these happy accident spaces will evolve into, like in the post-COVID situation. Do you think the design sensibilities of these spaces in a residential setting particularly, like will they change the definition of a lobby, the spill out spaces? Do you see them evolving into something particular, or do you think it's just like a short-term thing which may not have a long-term effect?
I'll answer your question in not in three different ways, but I'll answer your question in the context of a luxury development and an integrated township development. Okay. So
Sure.
in the context of a luxury development, I'm not sure if you're from Bombay, but if you're familiar with the Imperial that we built in Tardev, I think what has worked well for us is the community engagement, as I mentioned earlier. So what did we do to engage and get the community? So I think one is it started right from inception, and I don't mean to sound arrogant, but I think it was the nature and actually to make sure we got we made sure to get the like-minded families together in the development. Unfortunately, today developers don't have the luxury of choosing their customers, but I think that is something that kind of worked in one aspect. But having said that, the typical amenities or the typical luxuries one would expect in a luxury high-rise development is what has helped build the community engagement here. So we've got, the swimming pools, the club, the engagement spaces within that, so on and so forth. So this is your typical traditional bread and butter kind of stuff that one would do. But I think the manner in which you implement it and the quality of the same is important. Okay. Now, if I transport you to a mixed-use development in Kandivali that we are doing, in this integrated township. So at the township level, what we've done is, for example, we had a 2-acre patch of land. It's a 55-acre land parcel. So on the 2-acre land parcel pertinent to the highway, we had high tension wires going. We checked with the authorities if that had any radiation or impact on families, if they went and used that for a park. Sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah, I mean, in between it had gone off.
Yeah, so we actually converted that 2-acre parcel into a large community garden. So what we've done at the level of the township is have had multiple engagement points for smaller gatherings. It could be a small square, it could be, and that's more of a engagement with the architects to make sure that we created those engagement spaces it could be in the form of public garden, it could be in the form of a square, it could be in the form of an alcove. But along the entire development, we've created these multiple pockets of places where people can engage. We've overlaid that with high street retail and some amount of community engagement on that high street retail. But more important is how do you program these spaces? So the idea is that how do we get communities to engage and use these public spaces? And that is something that we've been continually working on. So we had multiple activities. So we had like a Sarovar Street Fest that we had in that location. So how do we maximize these public spaces by programming them effectively to maximize the footfall? Is the community bonding that I was referring to. Now, at the level of a building in that mixed-use township, we have a building that we're building of slightly more compact homes because that's the nature and that's the kind of demand now. So we've created certain spaces. It goes out of our FSI, which is fine, but we've given those spaces to have engagement at a smaller level. So we've got engagement at the level of the building. We've got engagement at the level of the community through different forms. And most important is how do you program those spaces?
Great.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks.
I think we're coming to the end of our program. Unless somebody would like to say something at the end.
One thing I want to just lastly before I shut up, because I've been talking a lot. So a lot of my friends are sending me WhatsApp messages and wondering what this is. So cheers to them. It's a vodka orange juice, okay?
I like how it's been constantly getting replenished though.
No wonder you've been talking so well. Huh? Okay, guys. Thank you all very much for having been here. It was a fantastic conversation. And I'm sure there's no end to this conversation. We can always take it offline as well. And this is an ongoing topic. It's only the beginning of the post. We hope to come to the post pandemic time, and things change for the better. And as I said, finishing it off, to look for opportunity in this adversity.
Thank you.
I would just like to add one thing, that yes, real estate, I mean, what we see, and, there has been these last 1.5 months, there's been a lot of challenging time for the entire country and entire world, I would say. But I eventually feel somewhere down the line with the fall, there has always been a bigger rise. So I think somewhere we all would come up, in a better way. And I feel India has a much better chance than anyone else in the world. And people have seen how, our government, and as Mr. Thakkar rightly said, that the BMC and its forces are really working very hard to see to it that this spread doesn't, this virus doesn't spread too fast, and they're controlling it really well, and which is well appreciated by everybody across the world. So I feel people are going to look India at a very different eye, and which will eventually benefit, developers, will benefit manufacturers, will benefit each and every one of us, because the perception of the world is going to change, and I see a greater opportunity coming probably 3 to 6 months ahead.
Great. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, guys.
See you soon.
See you. Bye.
Bye.